Hi everyone, Ariel here, back with another talk. This time we are going back to the political and philosophical focus that I had in the videos previous to the last two I did. I want to start out with giving you guys a little bit of context for this video because it's going to be important as we're moving through the discussion. So, first of all, the topic of the video today is to discuss the sort of fear politics that I'm seeing in today's society regarding COVID-19. I'm speaking purely from an American perspective here, so for any viewers who are not American, just know that I am not talking about global politics here because that's not something that I feel I'm currently qualified to discuss. I don't know enough about the response that other countries have had to the pandemic to really fully discuss that. So I'm going to avoid making claims about other people's countries when I don't know anything. I would rather not misrepresent other people's countries and their policies when I don't have the research right now to support it. So just to clear that one up. We are purely talking about America right now. So there's two different topics that I want to cover that are sort of related to each other. The first topic that I want to get into is a discussion of the response from the common people on the ground to the COVID-19 vaccines specifically, but also to masking and some of these other kinds of regulatory things that are going on. And then from there, I want to move into discussing something specific to the state that I live in. Here in Illinois, we recently had an interpretation of a law that we had on the books regarding non-discrimination policies for medical decisions. And we're going to get into the details on that here. But for now, suffice it to say, that's what we're kind of going to focus on here. So to give the background and the context that is necessary to lead into these discussions, I want to start by discussing my own perspective on the vaccinations and the masking. And this is probably going to upset people on both sides of the aisle. I actually know it will. But I'm going to say this anyway because I think that it's better to have this out there before we go into a discussion regarding the issues that I'm going to talk about today. So the first thing that I want to make clear here is that I am not anti-vax. I'm not against people in general getting vaccinated if that is something that they've discussed with their medical professional. I'm not in support of people getting every single vaccination under the planet just because. I think that you should only be taking medications or preventative measures for things that you are actually at high risk of getting or dying from. So my personal stance on it has been that if I'm looking at the medical history that I have and at my risk of contracting a specific illness and my risk of that illness being severe, and I'm looking at it and saying, okay, my risk level is actually really high, then I'm probably going to go get the vaccine for it. If, on the other hand, I look at it and I'm saying, well, my risk level is not super high of me contracting it, or if I do contract it, I'm not at severe risk of illness because of my lifestyle, my underlying medical conditions, or the lack thereof, then I'm not going to put something into my body that could potentially cause more harm to it than the illness itself likely would. So that's kind of the perspective that I come from regarding vaccination in general, is that if it's not something you need for where you're at personally with your medical record and your lifestyle and your health, then you shouldn't take it any more than I would just take, any other medication over the counter or otherwise for something that I don't currently have or am not at high risk of developing. So that said, I have personally chosen not to take the COVID vaccine because looking at the research, even though the evidence is that there's a good number of people that have had it and they're fine, I'm not at high risk of developing serious illness if I get COVID. The other factor that factors into this too is whether or not I've already had the illness that I'm getting vaccinated against, because if I've already had it, then I have the antibodies. And so far, no studies are actually out that conclusively prove that this virus acts any differently than any other virus that I would be vaccinated against. So, given that that is the case, I don't see a reason to get it because I'm fairly certain I've already had it. My family and I got really sick right before they announced the first couple of cases, and then it spread like wildfire. So it's pretty obvious from looking at the spread that it was already here in the States for quite a while before we fully diagnosed the first couple of cases. Otherwise, you wouldn't have seen it cropping up all of a sudden all over the place, not just in like one concentrated area. So, my family got really, really sick with all of the symptoms. Some of us had different symptoms than others, but I personally got really sick and it was miserable. All the symptoms pretty much that they describe as being COVID related, I had, and it took me a while to get over it, but I did. They didn't have tests back then, obviously, because they hadn't diagnosed it as an issue that they needed to be testing for, so there's no way to conclusively know without taking a super expensive test to see if I've got the antibodies. But that kind of factors into my decision too, is the fact that I'm pretty sure I already had it. I've been exposed numerous times to people who it was confirmed had it, and then other people who were also exposed at the same time to that same set of people got sick, as to be expected, and neither myself nor anyone in my family did, and that's happened multiple times. So, I mean, anecdotal evidence, I guess, but that kind of is factored into my decision as well. My factoring those things into my decision, and like those are different factors or risk factors than somebody else would have. So that's why in any of the videos that I have made, I have not argued specifically against the vaccine, because I don't think that the vaccine itself is more dangerous to every person than the virus itself. Maybe. I certainly know that there are some people within my community that have gotten it, and they did so because they were at high risk of contracting it. They were in an older age group. They were at high risk of getting really sick. I respect that decision. I understand why they made that, and I think that it was a good decision to make that, in that case. But to say that everyone, across the board should be getting this, that's not necessarily a reasonable response any more than it would be for any other medication. So that's sort of where I stand on the issue. On the issue of masks, that's another one that I have seen people freaking out about still. So let's put it this way. The studies, because I've looked at a lot of different scientific studies that have been sent through from different people that I know. Now, obviously, I'm not a scientist, so the only thing that I can do is look at the studies that they've published and, go, okay, that's what the science says. So at the beginning of the pandemic, like most other people, when we didn't have a lot of information about how this spread or how, we just knew it was highly transmissible, we didn't know a whole lot besides that, they were saying mask up because that, will protect you from getting it and also protect others if, you have it and you don't know. So, like a lot of others, okay, yes, it's uncomfortable. I hate the stupid thing. I'm claustrophobic, like severely claustrophobic. Elevators bother me, so having something like that over my face for any long period of time is really, really difficult. I probably am at higher risk of spreading it wearing the thing because I fiddle with it and I'm touching my face constantly and getting germs all over my hands and then spreading it to whatever I touch. But regardless, I was wearing it at the beginning because, I'm capable of doing so, and so far as I knew, there was a rational reason to say, let's put this on, because it does, supposedly, it protected against transmission. Well, since then, they've done studies, and a couple of things have been proven. The first big thing that has been proven, and this is something that the CDC also said and it's being ignored, but in one interview that was done with the director of the CDC, they openly admitted that the cloth masks specifically don't do anything. So let's put it this way. There's levels of protection that the masks actually offer. So I believe it's the NH95 mask that they were talking about when they did this interview on this with the CDC director, where he essentially said that the N95 does protect against COVID. And the reason that it does that is because it's able to actually like filter the air. Now, what we know about COVID right now is that the actual particle size of the virus, it's aerosolized, which means that it's so small that it is going to go through the gaps in the cloth mask. Now, as someone who sews and deals with fabric regularly, I kind of did question this when they first were saying this, because cloth has a weave to it. And if something is, really super, super tiny, like think about it this way. If you walk outside with the cloth mask on in the middle of winter and you breathe out, you're going to still see all of the condensation from your breath outside of the mask. So it's not keeping anything in, guys. It's not. And if the virus is aerosolized, as we've discovered that it is, then the cloth mask specifically is not offering any protection, because the particles are too small to be trapped by the mask while letting the carbon dioxide leave. So they've done different studies on this. They have proven that the cloth masks specifically don't work. So I'm sorry to tell you, but the science that is out doesn't support wearing the cloth masks. Now, if you guys all want to put on like the N95 masks, if you can get your hands on those, like, go for it. At least you would have a reason for doing so. Like, there would be an argument there. Now, that said, I am not going to sit here and be like, in no circumstance ever would I wear one. I don't believe that they offer you any protection whatsoever against getting COVID. But that said, there is sort of the respect component, and there is the aspect that on an individual level, if I'm, visiting somebody's house or something, then if they request that I wear one of two things is going to happen. Either the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to decide, is that person important enough to me that it's worth hanging out with them and inconveniencing myself? If it's not, then I'm just not going to go to their house. That's an individual decision that I can make. I can say, let's meet somewhere that's outside, that you're more comfortable, whatever. There are options. But, and that's a personal decision, and I'm not going to sit here and complain about the fact that that person did it. Now, do I think that their decision is rational? No, I don't. But it is their decision to make, and it's their choice. So I will respect the fact that they have the right to ask that on their property, in their, presence, on their property. I respect that, and I wear one. If I do decide that the person is important enough to me that I do want to, make that visit in-house, then I'm going to respect their wishes. Now, I might try to limit the visit because, like I said, I personally, I have problems with the thing, and I start to feel like I can't breathe. And the only real solution that I've found to that is to essentially wear a mask that literally does nothing. Okay, none of them really do anything, but this one really doesn't. So it makes everybody else feel better, essentially, which is all that any of the other ones, cloth-wise, are doing, is making people feel better. And I will link a list of different studies that you can review that are scientific studies that were done, so that you guys can see that and make your own call about the research. But that said, as far as the respect component goes, I think that there should be a level of respect for other individuals, even if they're being irrational. And if you don't feel that that's something you can accommodate the request, and it's an issue of, okay, I respect you, but my form of respecting your wishes is, okay, I'm just not going to meet up with you so long as this is your stance. Okay, that's fine. Again, that's your personal decision to make, just as it was their personal decision to request that you wear the mask. There is certainly a psychological benefit to other people to you wearing it because it makes them feel better. They look at it and they think it provides some measure of safety. Now, the studies, again, are not showing that. And the evidence has been mixed since the beginning of the pandemic. This is not a new thing. But that said, because we've been told so often that this is going to help, and because it's human to want to find a way to control the situation when it feels out of control, we're going to tend to do things that are not necessarily rational and don't necessarily make a difference, but they make us like mentally feel like we're doing something in a situation that's out of our hands. That's perfectly natural. It's not necessarily always a rational response, but it is human to do that. And so I don't think that we should be looking at other people who wear them because it makes them feel better and being like, what's the matter with you? Like, okay, yeah, your stance might not be rational, but who cares? Who does it hurt? You know, like, if you want to do that, do it. That said, when it comes to other situations outside of an issue of dealing with individuals that you're in contact with who are hosting events or whatever else, it's their property, they're asking you to respect that. Outside of that issue, when we're talking about issues within like a store or shopping somewhere, because the science doesn't actually support that, I feel under no moral obligation to wear one. Now we're going to kind of go into some details regarding why I don't feel a moral obligation. I mean, obviously one of them is the fact that it doesn't actually prevent transmission or prevent you from spreading it. So if it's not going to prevent you from spreading it anyway, and that's the reason they're saying to wear it, then you're not saving any lives. You're not helping anyone else. You're not doing anything for anyone else. You're just making other people feel better about themselves and about their risk of catching it. So if you want to do that, again, that's your decision. On this channel, you will find that we're all about personal liberty here. It is your decision to act in that way if you choose to. I personally don't choose to. Now, does that mean that I'm going to be a jerk about it if the store employees walk up to me and say, you know, you have to wear one at our establishment? No, it doesn't. Now, I might point out to them, depending on the legal situation, that like, hey, you actually can't do this because it's discriminating against me based off of a medical decision. We're going to get to that later on in the video. However, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. Like, I'm not going to be the person that's like yelling in their face. And if it's truly an issue and I'm truly like, I am not putting this on today, I'll just leave. It really is that simple. If the business is going to be that way, the answer is just don't shop there. There are plenty of stores that I have chosen not to shop at for different reasons, like not even just this, but like in general, because they have a stance that I disagree with and I know it and it's like openly out there and a problem. So fine, I just don't fund them. I don't give them my money. That is my way of saying I'm not in support of whatever you've just done, and it's a big enough issue that I'm willing to inconvenience myself. That's how the free market works, guys. It's perfectly acceptable to do that. You don't have to be a jerk about it. And I mean, I hope people understand that I'm not like, I'm usually not a jerk about it. I mean, I'm not happy about it. And I have walked out sometimes when people are requiring it, and it's a day where I'm just like, for my own mental health, I can't do this. Like, there are some days that are better than others, and so it's just like, okay, well, I guess I'm just not going to go to the store today. Like, I made that decision a lot before they started lifting mask restrictions in some areas, and I just decided, you know, I can't handle this today mentally. Like, I literally do not have the mental energy to deal with the claustrophobia on top of everything else that's going on today, so I'm just not going to go to the store. I shouldn't have had to make that choice, but you know, because of state ordinances and mandates, I had to. So that's kind of how I handle like the mask issue, is that I don't think that there is any actual scientific evidence that the cloth masks specifically do anything. And that's kind of just a common sense stance too, if you've ever observed in the winter what happens when you wear one. But that said, if you want to wear one, I'm not going to tell you not to do that because it's your decision. So with that kind of out of the way, the last thing that I need to point out before we move into the video's main content is that, as I kind of hinted at earlier, the stance that I'm coming from here is that, constitutionally speaking, individual rights are paramount in the United States. Now, this is something that is not well supported by either the conservative or the liberal side in most cases, because we often treat the Constitution as though, well, it protects specific individual liberties, but it's open to interpretation exactly which of those liberties are protected. And it's treated as kind of a contract with, like, these specific things are intended to be protected, and then this sphere of things isn't. As a general rule of thumb, most Republicans are kind of in that stance where it's like, okay, well, I'm fiercely supportive of gun rights, and so the Constitution protects that. But then there are other areas where the Constitution also protects what's being done, but they don't like it, so the Constitution doesn't protect that. So essentially, they're not saying that the Constitution's the spirit behind the Constitution was that individual liberties are paramount and come before government dictates and edicts in most cases. It's a contract between us and the government that says, here's what you can do. And as long as you're not infringing on these specific things, no individual liberties have been, attacked. And they very narrowly define what individual rights are. Now, if you read the actual text of the Constitution, there is the clause that actually says anything that has not been specified as being power to the federal government is reserved to the states and the people. That's pretty clear that the founders did in fact intend not to make the Constitution and our Bill of Rights the sole example of everything that falls under individual liberties, but rather their whole entire purpose was to restrict what the government could and could not do so that they could protect personal liberties on a broad scale, not just the examples that they specifically enshrined, because those things were at the highest danger of being usurped. So the other argument that I oftentimes hear, and this comes from the liberal side, is, well, it is a living document, guys, and we can't interpret it the way that it was initially meant. We can't interpret it as the founders intended it, because they lived in, like, the 18th century, 19th century, guys, and that's outdated. Okay, did the founders anticipate, like, the internet, for example? No. Obviously not. But they did understand, living in the time period that they did, that there were going to be innovations and things that we would develop and invent that they couldn't plan for. So the point of the document is not to tell you what specifically to do in every single possible situation that a society could run into. That's impossible. The point of the document was to provide guidelines and principles to protect individual rights. So those haven't stopped being true just because we've added the internet. Rather, they are actually principles that you can use to guide how much interference the government can actually have, if any, in that sphere of public life. So the principles have not stopped being true just because we've added new ways in which we have to learn how to apply them. So getting rid of the Constitution or altering it completely to fit the liberal agenda is not the answer. It's there to protect all of our individual rights and liberties. The point in America was to provide as much freedom as possible for the greatest number of people possible. And living in such a diverse society as they did, even with just 13 colonies, there was so much difference between the North and the South, and just between the colonies in general, in how they ran things, and the people and the atmosphere and the subcultures, that if it had been a prescriptive constitution that said, here's what we're all going to believe, here's what we're all going to do, that wouldn't have worked. Now, on a state and local level, that does and can work, but not for something on that broad of a scale. And if the reason that they had to do the Constitution the way they did was in order to provide liberty for people of all different types to live without government interfering in their exercise of those rights. How is that any less true today when we've got 50 states and you're lucky if you get 3 of them to agree with each other? Like, you can't expect that every state is going to run the same way as the other, and so the only way to ensure that everybody gets the greatest number of individual liberty possible is to limit what the government is allowed to do. That is still true today, just as it was back when the founders wrote the Constitution. So, with that out of the way, and understanding both my particular stance on the masks and the vaccine, and the perspective overall that this channel comes from regarding the Constitution and individual liberty, let's jump into the discussion of the first topic at hand, which is the issue of the fear response that I am seeing from the community at large, from all over the US. It's not just in my local sphere, but all these different stories. So I find the response that I am seeing mainly from the left, but there are also Republicans and people in the middle who are responding this way too. The response right now that is extremely prevalent in American culture is that if you do not get vaccinated, if you don't mask up, even if you're vaccinated, then you are an immoral person, and they're going so far now as to label us domestic terrorists if we don't comply. This is stemming not just from political rhetoric, which is its own set of issues, and that's not really what we're here to discuss today, but also from a cultural level, from just everyday average Americans. There is this response, the reasoning kind of follows this. Okay, I've been told that this particular disease is going to, kill everyone. Let's just exaggerate. Obviously, COVID is not going to kill everyone based off the statistics we have. Even within high-risk groups, it's not going to kill every single person who gets it. But let's just assume, for sake of the argument, the basic idea is, I've been told that this thing is highly dangerous and I'm going to die if I get it. Okay, so now I'm afraid. I don't want to get this thing because it's nasty and I don't want to die. So I've been told that these are the things that I can do to protect myself and others. So I'm going to do those things because they give me a sense of control, and I've been told that they're going to protect me. So, up to this point, if the evidence supports that those things are actually going to protect you, that's a reasonable response. Then it's taken a step further. And they say that despite the fact that there is mixed evidence on this, despite the fact that, there's different viewpoints out there, and there's different studies being done, and the evidence is still not all out, despite the fact that that might be the case, the government has told me that this is going to protect me, and so I'm going to do it. But conversely, I'm afraid of the people who aren't doing it, because refer back to point 1, I'm seriously afraid of catching this thing, and I could die. I'm going to die if I catch it. If I catch it, it's all over. And so not only do I think that I should do whatever I can to protect myself, but I think that other people should protect me too. That's kind of the reasoning that I am seeing follow from a lot of people right now. And that is this idea that it's not just my responsibility to take care of myself, it's other people's responsibility to take care of me, and conversely, my job to take care of other people. So it's kind of the mentality of I am my brother's keeper. The problem with this is that if you think that way, then the logic that follows is that if somebody else, regardless of the reason, is refusing to do the things that I think are going to protect me, that person is not only selfish, but they are a danger to other people. And the conclusion that seems to be following from most of these people is that not only are they a danger to me and a danger to society, regardless of whether they have the illness even. We're not even talking whether they have the illness. We're just saying, you might have it. I don't know. And so therefore you're a danger to me. Everybody is a danger to me. And unless they take the precautions I think will protect me, they're a danger to me. And they're a danger to everyone else. And the conclusion that kind of follows from this is not only are they a danger, but if somebody happens to catch it from them, or even if we don't have any way to know for sure that you caught it from them. But let's just say the person is sick and you know for 100% that they caught it from the person who was sick. If I catch it from a person who is sick and I die, that is the other person's fault. So you can understand how, if that is your viewpoint, you would label people who refuse to mask up, people who refuse the vaccine, as domestic terrorists, because they're apparently trying to kill everyone around them. They're a walking time bomb. That is the logic that is going into this. Now, if any of that doesn't make sense to you, it's probably because it's not particularly rational. Okay, number one, you are responsible for your health, and you should do what you know will protect you, including, if necessary, stay away from people that you know are a danger to you. Like, if there are people within your sphere, and rationally and objectively speaking, they are doing things that put you at further risk and you're not willing to accept that risk, then you just don't spend time with those people. It's relatively simple. I mean, it is unfortunate. Nobody wants to have to do that, especially if they're close to the person, but that's just the way that it goes. You do that in order to protect yourself. I have people within my circle who have done this kind of a thing in order to protect themselves and their families. And I understand that decision. I know people who have family members or are themselves particularly vulnerable, and so they don't want to take the risk of being around a bunch of people. And to them, it doesn't matter whether or not the people have vaccinated or not. In the particular cases of people I know, it's not even about whether or not the person masks up or vaccinates. It's just that, I don't want to risk being in areas where transmission is likely or higher in likelihood, because I don't want to catch it potentially and spread it. That is a reasonable response to say, okay, I'm going to determine what I do around what I objectively speaking can do to lower my risk. So if there's something that I, literally, like, for example, I probably wouldn't be going to live baseball stadiums if I'm in a high risk category, right? Like, I don't want to be around a bunch of other people and risk getting it. So you make decisions about your own health in any situation based off of the evidence that you have, and you look at the evidence objectively, you talk to medical professionals, and you make a decision based off of that on how you're going to live your life. It's just like, if you're high risk of a heart attack, for example, you might, talk to your medical professional and change your diet. So it's kind of the same idea. You are responsible for your health, and that goes for every situation. So you are responsible for doing things that you can objectively and rationally prove will actually help your health. If you choose to do additional things that are not actually, medically proven to help or whatever, regardless of the situation, that's your choice. Just as it would be your choice to ignore medical advice and do stuff that's not smart, but you are ultimately responsible for your own decisions. Somebody else is not responsible for your health. They're not. They are responsible for theirs. So it is true that if, the measures that they could take to protect their health, there's medical proof, for example, that vitamin D and zinc levels have a lot to do with whether or not you contract it and how bad your symptoms will be. There is also medical evidence out there that obesity severely raises your risk of, not just contracting it and getting severe symptoms, but dying from it. So if you know those things and, you're low on vitamin D or on zinc, then it would make sense for you to say, I'm going to, take those things. So there's medical evidence for that, and it's a reasonable thing to look to science and say, okay, based off of the knowledge we have now, these are the things that I should be doing to protect myself. Okay, that's reasonable. But somebody else taking zinc and vitamin D is not going to do anything for you. They're not somehow protecting your health because they take preventative measures. Now, obviously, if they know that they're sick, they shouldn't be out and around people. it doesn't mean that people won't do it. It just means they shouldn't. And that's true regardless of what you have. If I'm sick, with the flu, or I'm sick with a cold or something, I'm not going to go out and be around a bunch of people because A, I feel like garbage, and B, why? Like, there's not a good reason. Stay home, get better. That's just decent behavior. But if I don't actually have something and I'm just taking preventative measures in order to make sure I don't catch it, that's my job to take care of my health. I'm doing that to take care of me. It is not my job to take care of you. It is your job to do the things that you know are going to lower your risk, and the things that are safe for you to do to lower your risk. And that's individualized too in a lot of cases. I mean, medicine is not something that is a one size fits all. Now, if the masks had actually been proven to work, that would kind of be overall a one size fits all, I guess, because if you wore it, you'd have protection. But aside from that, when it comes to actual like preventative care measures, it's not a one size fits all. Everybody's a little bit different. But to argue that somehow, if you are around me and I'm sick and you catch it, it's my fault and I wanted to kill you, is idiotic. You don't blame, like, as much fun as it is when you're ribbing siblings about the fact that they got sick with a cold and you caught it from them, or you caught it somewhere. You can't prove that you caught it from them, but, they got sick, you caught it. As much fun as it is to rib them about the fact that you caught it from them, it's not actually their fault. I mean, if you stayed away from them and you did your best to like avoid the contamination and like actually catching whatever they have, you did your part, they did their part, they're not to blame. Furthermore, the other thing that we should be considering here too, beyond the fact that the mask issue specifically that people are complaining about is not, like, it's not protecting you according to the actual studies done on it. It's really mixed, and the evidence that we've got now says that it's not, at least not for the cloth masks. Beyond that, if we're looking at the actual vaccination issue, the evidence that has come out, and they've done interviews with the CDC on this, and disclaimer here, I don't consider the CDC to be a reliable source for COVID information because they've lied so often, and because the people who are heading it up have monetary and political incentive to lie to you about all kinds of different things. But since I know that some of my viewers do consider it to be a reliable source, the interview that they did with one of the CDC directors, I don't know if there's multiple, but they did a interview with a CDC director on, I believe the original video was from CNN. Yes, it was from CNN. So they did a video with the CDC director on CNN, and what he said in the video is that the vaccine cannot prevent transmission. And this is being borne out by the number of breakthrough cases that we're seeing. Now, this doesn't mean that if you have a breakthrough case with the vaccine, you're necessarily going to get as sick as someone who wasn't vaccinated. There is still some evidence out there that it is providing some protection from the symptoms. But there are new studies also coming out that are raising concerns about whether or not the vaccine actually works the way that it was intended to in order to prevent the virus from actually getting into your cells. So essentially it's providing a protection through your immune system, but it's not actually, from the things that I've been hearing from different medical professionals, it is not preventing the virus from replicating in your nasal passage, which is not, the virus isn't in your bloodstream necessarily at the point that it is replicating there. So it may not be able to replicate in your bloodstream necessarily, but it is able to replicate in your nasal passages and your sinuses. And so you might not experience severe symptoms, or you might experience no symptoms at all, but you can still spread it. And so, just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean that you are actually protecting anyone else from getting it from you. So the idea that if you're unvaccinated, you're a ticking time bomb because, oh, you might have it and you could pass it on. I'm sorry, if you're vaccinated, you still can. So that's a moot point to begin with. If it wouldn't have been a valid argument to begin with, but it's doubly not valid when you look at the fact that vaccinated people can still pass it on, both to other vaccinated people and to non-vaccinated people. So, the only person you are protecting if you get vaccinated is yourself. So, if you make the judgment call that you are better off getting vaccinated than not, great, you're protecting yourself. There's some evidence out there to say that it is still, okay, yes, it's not as effective as they thought it would be, but it's still giving you some measure of protection, assuming, that no new studies come out proving that it's, killing us all. Assuming that doesn't happen, which, I mean, I doubt that it would kill everyone, but there are some concerns about whether or not your cells antibodies might be like helping the virus into the blood cells and doing stuff that it's not supposed to. But currently that research is not conclusive, so we can't really argue that yes, 100% that's what is happening and it's dangerous to us all. We can't claim that because we don't have the research, so I'm not going to make that claim. What I will say though is that the research and the guidance that is out there right now is pretty conclusive that you can still spread it if you're vaccinated. So the only thing that it is doing is protecting you. So good. You're taking a preventative measure to protect yourself. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's not act like we have the moral high ground here because we got vaccinated and someone else didn't. I'm sorry. You don't have the moral high ground. Okay? Now, maybe it'll turn out that you're the smarter one. But again, this is such an individualized medical decision, just like any other vaccine would be, that it may be that, you made a smart decision for you, but if everyone else followed that, there would be a high number of people that it would not have been a smart decision for. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now with the issues that are being seen with this, is that not everybody should be taking it. Surprise, surprise. That's kind of how all medications are. Not everyone can take everything. Like, for example, common cold medicine, like NyQuil. That is something that, it's over the counter. Most people can take it. I can't because it makes me sick to my stomach. It's not technically an official allergy, but I guess it just interacts badly with other health conditions that I've got. And so I don't take it. That's an individual thing to me. Like, the person down the street might be able to take it and be fine. So it's not any different with any other medication. It's not any different with any other vaccine. So it's not moral high ground to be like, oh, I didn't get it, and so you're an idiot for getting it. Or to be like, oh, I got it, and so you're an idiot for not, and you're trying to kill us all. No. As a matter of fact, there are people who actually medically can't get this vaccine. Are they also terrorists because they can't do that? Like, that's not a fair response. The only thing that this is stemming from is fear. The government has convinced everyone that everyone is equally at risk of dying if they get this thing. They freaked everyone else out about the caseloads. They're not talking about the number of deaths per day that we still have, and the fact that those have gone down in large portion in most places. They're not talking about the actual science behind it. They're not talking about how, viruses work. They're not talking about the fact that, yes, we have increasing caseload, but not necessarily increasing deaths because we found better ways of handling it, better ways of treating people for it. The number of cases that you have is not what's important. I mean, it is in the sense that you have to have treatment for everyone, because if you don't, then people are going to die because you weren't able to handle the caseload, which was the initial idea behind why we had the whole 15 days to slow the spread thing. But the deaths are the important thing, the number of people who are actually dying from this. People don't, we have record numbers of cases, let's just say, of, the common cold, but it's not killing anyone, so what do we care? Yes, you've got the sniffles and it's annoying and you wish you didn't, but it's not killing anyone in most cases. Obviously, COVID is more dangerous than the common cold. I'm not trying to say that they're equivalent, but the point is just that when it comes to any given illness, the important thing is the number of people who are dying from it or having severe long-term effects. And there are definitely people that are dying from it. There are people who are having adverse effects, and I'm not trying to dismiss that. That's why it's important for us to be talking to a medical professional about their medical opinion and looking at the science and at the actual data that's available. And I don't mean the CDC, at least not just the CDC, because they're only portraying one side of the narrative, and you need both in order to make a rational decision. So we've kind of discussed why the fear response from mostly the left at the moment is not a rational response. To suggest that somehow everyone who refuses to get it, regardless of the reasons, is a terrorist who wants you all dead is crazy. We don't want you all dead. And in fact, if we know we're sick or whatever, we're going to be taking precautions to not spread it to other people because that's just the decent and human thing to do. However, there is also an irrational response that we're seeing from the conservative side of the aisle, and that is the response that nobody should get it. It's going to kill us all. Okay. I've yet to see actual information to suggest that that is the case. Yes, we're seeing record numbers of adverse reactions. That's true. If you look at the actual VAERS data, I think they're up to like 17,000 or something and climbing of adverse reactions to this. For reference, for those of you who haven't looked at the VAERS data, there's about 8,400 adverse reactions and or deaths attributed to all the vaccines in the last 33 years since the VAERS database started to be kept. And keep in mind too that they say roughly 10% of that the VAERS data is only recording roughly 10% of the actual reactions. So that's a lot of reactions to be having to one vaccine. So I'm not saying that necessarily that proves causation, because it doesn't. They're not necessarily able to link every single one of those adverse reactions to the vaccine itself. It could have been due to other things, because the physicians are required to report anytime that somebody dies or has a reaction shortly after having any medication, and for the VAERS database specifically, vaccines. So I'm not saying that necessarily it proves causation. There need to be more studies to prove that. The problem here is less whether or not it proves causation and more the fact that the numbers are alarming and we should be looking into that. So there is something to conservatives who are saying we don't have enough research on this. This is concerning. Why aren't we studying this? That's definitely a question in my mind, is why are we not studying this? Because as different congressmen on the Republican side have pointed out, that's a lot of adverse reactions compared to, how many other vaccines that we've had in the last 33 years and we only have 8,400 reported. That's a pretty large difference. And so we definitely should be doing studies to determine why this is happening. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the vaccine itself is dangerous in every case. Now, maybe that's what they find. Maybe they find that something specific about how it's made is a problem and they need to fix that before, continuing to release it. But we don't have enough evidence to say either way exactly what's going on. That's something that would need to be studied more. Right now, it doesn't seem like they're particularly interested, for whatever reason, in actually studying that out. But the conservative response to say that somehow every person who gets it is going to die from this, or no person should get it, that's also equally unreasonable, because there are large numbers of people who have gotten it, and yes, they got really sick and it's miserable, but they're fine now. So at least for the older age categories, that's something that should be a consideration, whether or not you should get vaccinated, because you are at higher risk. And as far as not knowing the long-term effects go, because that's another argument that is of concern, that should be of concern to young people who are like my age, because if it does turn out that there are long-term impacts of this that we don't know, we haven't studied it out enough, we're going to live long enough, presumably, that's going to matter to us. For the older groups, the specific things that they are concerned about being potential long-term issues are not things that the older generation is necessarily needing to be concerned about. So, given that, you probably should weigh out whether or not you want to get vaccinated. And again, that's not something that I'm not going to condone one way or the other here. because it's your personal decision. It's not my job to tell you. And I don't have my medical license. I'm not a doctor. So you should be talking about this with your medical professional to make the choice. What I am saying here is that the response that everyone is equally at risk of, dying or being severely injured from this is not fair. I do think that there is a serious issue within the conservative community of not evaluating sources nearly as well as they should, because there is an issue. I'm in a conservative circle most of the time outside of Facebook, outside of my author's work. Most of the people that I know are conservative. And I'm in different groups where they exchange information about COVID, about, government overreaches in the area of COVID, which we will get to later. But one of the things that I've noticed about some of the sources that come through those groups is that they're not rational. They're not reasonable. Like, you can't find the actual sources. They're not a scientific journal. They're not citing scientific journals. Sometimes they cite them, but then you go to try to find them and you can't find them. Or they're all written in like Japanese or Chinese and you can't read anything. The other issue that frequently is a problem is that China does in fact engage in an information war, and they put things out there that are not true intentionally to foster further political divide between Americans. It's to their advantage. China's not our friend, guys. I mean, I don't think that should come as any super big shock, but they're not our friends. They're our enemy. And while we might have, a truce right now, we're in a Cold War with them when it comes to information on all sorts of different levels. And it is in their best interest to rile all of us up, make us mad, get us believing things that are absolutely insane. Unfortunately, it's really hard to separate fact from fiction, because there has been an increasing number of situations where people, wrote something off as a conspiracy theory, for example, and then it turned out it was actually true. But that's not necessarily, the rule of thumb. It's not reasonable to assume that, well, it sounds crazy, I know, but crazier things have happened. No, you need actual evidence to base it on. So, from the conservative side, I would say we need to do a better job about evaluating our sources and making sure that there is actual scientific evidence that we're able to track it back to, that these are real studies being done and not just, people making things up. That's difficult. It's not always easy. And I mean, I've seen some things where I was like, this sounds good, but I'm not really sure if it's reliable. So everybody should be double checking sources and not just believing whatever they hear because it comes through a group of people they trust. People who are generally reasonable and rational can still send things through that are not rational and that are not based on actual fact. They can also mess up. They might have thought that the source was a trustworthy source, and then it turns out it's not because, they didn't do enough research. It doesn't make them bad people. It just means they were wrong. And so we have the duty ourselves to make sure that we are actually evaluating what we're sent and not just believing whatever we hear. And that's a big problem that I see in the conservative circles, is that they're the opposite side of the fear response. So the liberals are over here afraid of all of us because we won't vaccinate, and they're ignoring the facts on their side in some cases. But then they also kind of have a point about the conservatives that you guys are super afraid that the government is trying to kill y'all. I mean, until evidence comes out that that is actually what's going on, that's not really reasonable to assume. Now, it's reasonable to be suspicious of government because history shows us that as soon as you let them overstep their bounds in one area, you give them an inch, they take a mile. So it's reasonable to be suspicious of government, certainly, but that suspicion shouldn't translate to conspiracy theory level assumptions. And we see this with the conservative circles all the time. They're not any better about rational thought than the liberals are, unfortunately. So like I said, I'm going to make both sides mad at me right now. Neither side is particularly good at this. And it doesn't mean that they don't have individuals within the community who are. It just means that on the whole, The two sides have their own separate set of beliefs that don't mesh well, their own set of standards by which they judge things, their own set of people, talking heads basically, that they believe, and they're not going to listen to the other side. And so that ends up having them operate within a vacuum where their viewpoints are never challenged, and it creates a feedback loop, which leads to them believing crazier and crazier things. So, yeah, both sides need to be doing a better job about that. Neither fear response is reasonable. And both of them are hindering us from making actual decisions that are good and solid. So, they're hindering people on the conservative side. It's hindering people who might genuinely need to get the vaccine because they're at severe risk of actually dying if they do get COVID. It's hindering those people from, choosing to get it. And I think that that is a problem because we need to be making sure we're making our decisions off of reason and rationality, and ideals, not just, I think the government is out to get me, so I'm not going to get it. Or I'm so afraid that I'm going to die from COVID, even though I'm 20 with no underlying conditions, I'm healthy, and I have great vitamin D levels, that I need to go rush out and get this medication that I probably don't need. Neither response is reasonable. Neither response is helpful because it leads to both sides demonizing others on the other side of the issue who have made different decisions. Now, might it be true that the person that you're talking to didn't make a good decision? Yeah, possibly. I know people as well who have gotten the vaccine, well, just because. Okay, just because is not a reason. Well, they paid me for it. That's also not a reason. Especially if, like some of the people that I knew, they're not exactly hurting for cash. So the fact that your company is like, I'll pay you $60 to go get it is not a good incentive to do it. Especially given the fact that, we don't know the long-term risks. And most of the people that I hear doing this are young people. Generally speaking, my generation seems to be the ones that, if they're doing that, don't seem to always have a great reason. They don't seem to have thought it out. It's not a medical, rational decision. It's a, well, why not? They might make my life miserable if I don't, so I'll go get it. It's not a good reason to get it. But on the other hand, unless you know the person's reasoning and you can objectively judge that was not a good reason for doing whatever has just been done, judging them is wrong. Like, it is not acceptable to judge someone else on their medical decision in absence of any evidence that would let you know why they made that choice. It's not acceptable to call your fellow Americans terrorists because they won't do what you think is best. And newsflash, both sides are equally capable of grabbing information that's not accurate. CNN lies all the time. That's not any more of a trustworthy news source than, grabbing something from China. Sorry. The people who are making the solid decisions are the ones who are saying, what is the medical advice out there? Let me talk to my doctor. If, necessary, if I'm thinking about getting it, let me talk to my doctor about it and get their medical opinion, not their political one. And let's make a decision based off my actual risk factor, based off of the situation. That's good decision making. That's how you should be doing it. You're weighing the costs versus the benefits, what we know versus what we don't. Your situation, you need to weigh those things. And that goes for both sides. And unfortunately, because of one side treating the other as terrorists and the other side treating them all as, government lackeys that just bend over and do whatever the government says, neither side is having a productive conversation about this and actually talking about the science, the studies, swapping information. And that's the best possible way for the government to seize control, because they get a group of the population that they actually care about the votes for, or whatever else. They get that group on board with them and on board with thinking they're all going to die if everyone doesn't do what they're told. As soon as everyone is scared that we're all going to die if we don't do as we're told, you end up with people being more and more willing to give up freedoms, to give up individual liberties in order to gain the illusion of safety. And I say illusion because the government is not going to protect you from getting COVID. They're not. None of the measures that they have actually taken have been effective in reducing COVID any more than it would have been effective if, people just did them on their own. And in many places, people did do them on their own, at least at the beginning, because in absence of any evidence that something didn't work, you have nothing to lose by doing it in the hopes that it does protect you. So it's not super helpful to have a fear response on either side, because you've got the one side that's entrenched in never take it, no matter what your situation, you could be on your deathbed, but don't take it. And then you've got the side that is like, if you don't take it, you're, on par with Hitler or something. Okay, either side is equally ridiculous, and neither side is going to help anyone to make a good, solid decision that is going to be best for their health or for their family's health if they're in charge of making those decisions. So, moving on from that one then, let's talk about the situation that is at a more local level, but it's kind of indicative of a broader scale issue that has been going on in the United States as a whole. So in Illinois, we had a bill. It was called the Freedom of Conscience Healthcare Act. And this particular bill was intended to protect medical professionals as well as individuals. Healthcare professionals are individuals, but it was meant to protect that field as well as, just average citizens from being discriminated against based off of their refusal to perform or to receive any particular medical treatment or testing. So that's pretty straightforward, pretty clear. And I'm going to put up on the screen here the original wording of the bill so that you guys can see. But yeah, the wording is relatively straightforward and clear on what it was meant to do. It literally was just intended to protect people from discrimination based off of what they choose to do regarding their health, because there were issues with that, unfortunately. So what ended up happening here in Illinois is that people have been using that law in order to protect themselves from having to get vaccinated. It was the broadest protection that Illinois law offered against the mandates that have been going on regarding vaccines. And it was good. It needed to be in place because it's protecting your right to either side of the aisle. So, for example, if the state turned around and decided to say, okay, you can't get vaccinated, it's super dangerous, it might kill you all, just like we said it would kill you all if you didn't get it. Okay, we've changed our mind, it's going to kill you all if you do get it, so you need to not get it. Okay, well, this particular bill would protect you from discrimination on the basis of choosing to take it as well. So the bill protects people both ways, not just on one side of the aisle, but because obviously the government is not cracking down on you and saying you can't get it and is in fact trying to force you to get it regardless of your situation. People have been using this bill in order to protect themselves from government overreach in this area. So it was being taken to the courts. We've had several different cases recently involving schools and private institutions and individuals who took this to the courts because they were being forced to vaccinate. In the cases of schools, they were being told, either you vaccinate everybody according to the mandate, or you lose your status with us, and that causes all kinds of problems for the schools. So they took it to court, and the judges have been consistently upholding the right of the individual to make their own medical decisions, which is what they should be doing. They were interpreting this bill to say it says you can't discriminate against them on the basis of medical decisions. And this is a medical decision. It's medical, treatment or procedure or testing, whether it was, because there were some lawsuits regarding having to test for COVID as well. It's an individual freedoms, individual rights issue. And the court was rightly ruling that the law protected these people. And so people were getting out of the problem. And because of the precedent that the courts were setting and the way that they were interpreting the law, it meant that, and obviously, if they were to legislate a new law that changed this, they might not have the support of the courts for doing that. So what they ended up doing was they took the bill and they didn't actually they modified it, so to speak, but they didn't modify or amend it in the usual way. Usually when a bill is amended, they're going to take it and they're going to add to it, or they're going to rewrite it and pass it as a new bill. That's not what they did here. Basically, what ended up happening was that they took the bill and they interpreted it. So the wording that they use in the new bill, based off of what I have been reading, is it literally just says that they're interpreting it to say that the people who originally wrote the bill meant to protect everything except your right to choose medical decisions of your own on the issue of COVID. Well, that obviously doesn't make sense because COVID was not around when this bill was written, and the bill was written to protect people's medical freedoms broadly. Broadly means broadly. It includes COVID. But the reason that they did this is because they couldn't get what they wanted through the courts. Literally, that's the only reason. And here we're seeing an issue with separation of powers because the legislative body cannot act as the judiciary. They are not to interpret the laws, they make the laws. And if they're not clear, if the laws that were passed previously are not clear, it is up to the courts to look at them and look at the original intention, look at the wording, and determine how it applies in that particular situation. The courts aren't there to rewrite the law. They're not there to decide based off of their own personal opinions what it should be. They're objectively looking at it and saying this was the intention when the bill was written, this is what was actually said, and therefore it applies to the situation this way. It's not always cut and dry, but generally speaking, courts usually are pretty unanimous on their decisions. I mean, there's a small percentage of cases that are really tough and aren't, and that's usually where it ends up going to the Supreme Court. But in this case, it wasn't, and it's been upheld overwhelmingly by our courts that people have the right to refuse the mandate that was made. Now, this doesn't mean that there can't be a mandate in place by the private employer, and that's a little bit, of a different situation if your state doesn't protect you medically from discrimination. But this one protects from not only discrimination by the government, but also discrimination by private, entities and businesses. So therefore, they were upholding your right to say, I'm not getting it and you can't fire me for it. So obviously, since the goal of the governor is to push the vaccine down everyone's throats, regardless of the efficacy of it, regardless of the studies on it, regardless of who you are, the issue here was the fact that the courts were getting in the way of an infringement upon individual rights. And because, as I pointed out, the vaccine doesn't stop transmission, there is no actual valid reason why somebody should have to get it. The only thing that it does, potentially, based off of the research that we've got right now, is protect you from getting more severe symptoms if you get it. It doesn't protect anyone else, and it doesn't protect from transmission. So given that that is the facts, or given that those are the facts regarding the vaccine, there's no legitimate reason for the government to be saying, well, it protects everybody else from you because you're a danger to everyone else if you don't get it. Okay, so it's not a situation like it was with smallpox or like it was with any of these other things where there's a precedent for it. Given that, this is definite overreach. And even, if we were to say that there was a legitimate reason, the way that the government went about it here in Illinois was not valid because it's upsetting the balance between the separation of powers, and that separation of powers is there precisely to avoid the situation that just occurred. Now, the context on this one is that they had the committee to decide whether or not they were going to pass the so-called revision, and the decision had a committee look at it first and recommend to the General Assembly what they thought should be voted on. And so there was time for people to turn in witness slips during that period, either for or against. And then there was another period of time to submit witness slips for or against the motion for the General Assembly voting on it. So Illinois and the government in Illinois received over 50,000 witness slips against passing this motion. And they received, I think it was around 720 that were approvals for passing the bill. So to put this into context, normally when bills like this are under consideration, you don't get that many people. And the other thing that is unusual about this is not just the overwhelming number of people who actually responded to this. You know, you had over 50,000 total who responded to this, but the fact that there were over 50,000 individuals who said they didn't want this to go through. That is an overwhelming number of people saying, this is not acceptable to us. We don't want this. It's not to say that nothing, that you're always going to get what you want when you petition the government. That isn't the point here. But the fact that Illinois is a majorly Democratic state, and yet you had over 50,000 people who took the time to write in where they wouldn't normally have done so otherwise to say, we oppose this, that is an impressive number. And it should be indicating the fact that there's such a large gap between the number of people who were in support of passing the measures that they were talking about versus people objecting to it, should be telling the government something about the fact that people are not on board with this. And it's not just Republicans. It is Democrats as well. And we're seeing an increasing number of people marching for the right to unmask children in schools, the fact that we shouldn't be pushing vaccines for children, which has already been starting to happen. You're seeing larger and larger numbers of people who are saying this is unreasonable and this is overreach. And they're looking to protect their individual rights because there is a recognition that there is no delimiting principle here. If they can force you to inject something into your body, what other rights are they going to respect? Let me just ask you, what gets more personal than what you do or don't put into your body? What can't they tell you that you have to do if we support the idea that the individual doesn't even have the right to decide what medical treatments they do or don't take? That ceases at this point. It ceases to be just an issue of should you or should you not take the vaccine. It becomes an issue of individual liberties. And that's something that, you should be seeing people, regardless of their vaccination status, regardless of their political party, standing up and objecting to when we see this massive overreach, because it's not going to stop here. And I think that's the biggest thing that we should be looking at when it comes to the Illinois issue, is that it's indicative of a larger problem, and that is the problem that the government is no longer run by we the people. Because if it were run by we the people, our politicians here and elsewhere where they're doing similar kinds of measures would have looked at what people had to say about this and said, the majority of people don't want this. This is unpopular. They don't want to run their state this way. Our agenda doesn't come before the people we serve. Now, I hope that the objections to it, that this is going to make people angry enough that when it comes to the voting booths, next year, the people who are doing this are gone. Not because I think that the politicians shouldn't recommend a certain course of action, but because they have zero right to demand a specific course of action, especially in this instance. They're meant to be there to protect everybody's right equally to the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. They're not there to guarantee that everybody gets equal opportunity to that. They're not there to guarantee that everybody is completely happy with all of the laws on the books at all times, but they are there to make laws that promote the ability to pursue those three things with as much freedom as possible for the greatest number of people possible. And the only way you do that is by getting the government's nose out of things, and they only do what they are specifically meant to do. So this is an issue that should be a bipartisan one. It's increasingly not been so, but it should be bipartisan, that we're all interested in protecting our individual liberties, and that should be the one thing that is the most important to all of us, regardless of where we stand on the political aisle, because preserving that individual liberty means preserving the protections for people who disagree with you, but it also means preserving your protections. So, while I'm interested in preserving my right to refuse the vaccine, I'm also interested in protecting other people's rights to choose to take it. I would be equally against the government coming in and saying you can't have this because it's your choice whether or not you want to take it. And while I think you should be making that decision rationally, you shouldn't be forced to make the decision one way or the other. It is up to you. So it's an issue of individual liberties and individual rights here. And as we said, the Constitution and the ideas behind it were always driving at protecting us from exactly this sort of government overreach that we're not just seeing here in Illinois, because, it's not confined to just my state, but it's all over the country that we're seeing this, and we're, seeing it from our federal government now. This is an issue that ought to be concerning all of us. And I bring it up because I think that a lot of times the underlying issue is being ignored, and people are focusing on the vaccine and being like, well, I think you should be vaccinated, so I'm in favor of the mandates. Okay, think about what you're actually supporting there. You're not supporting the idea that let's encourage people to get vaccinated. You're not supporting the concept that, you believe that it's safe and we should be promoting open exchange of information to convince people on the other side that our viewpoint is right. That's not what you're promoting. You're promoting the use of force to force other individuals to do what you want them to. The only way that you can justify that is through a fear response or through completely despotic, totalitarian viewpoints. That is the only way that you could possibly support that. And if you're on that second side, I'm sorry, but our Constitution protects our rights. And this country is all about individualism, all about individual liberty. So your viewpoint, while it might be popular right now, is not what this country was founded on. It's not what it's about. And I mean, you're finding a place now because people are abandoning those ideals or they don't understand those ideals. But that doesn't mean that that's what the country is all about or what it should be about. However, you have the freedom to promote those ideologies because of the individual liberties that our Constitution protects. To the rest of you on the other side who are supporting it because you think that somehow it's going to, encourage everybody else to do it, or you're afraid that everyone's going to kill you, I guess, because they got it, and you're afraid that they'll pass it to you if they don't do what the government says. Refer back to some of the earlier points that I made. But the point here is not about the vaccine specifically. That is the vehicle by which it is coming. That is what's, dividing us all. But that is not actually the issue that is mainly at hand. The issue at hand here in the underlying philosophical argument is whether or not individual rights are what we're going to support on an issue of individual liberty and freedom, one of the biggest areas of individual liberty and freedom, or whether or not we're going to support the state running everything. Because there are no stoppers here, okay? This has to be the hill we die on. I've said this before. It's the hill we die on, because if we allow the government to take our freedoms away and act as though we don't have the right to decide for ourselves what is best for our medical health, what else are they not, they're not going to stop there. Germany didn't stop there. No government who became a totalitarian dictatorship ever stopped with just the one thing. And it's always done in a crisis, every single time. There's always some sort of a crisis, whether it's, engineered or whether it's real. So we do need to be standing up on this issue, and that's kind of, why I wanted to bring this up. Not only about the larger issue of the mindset that I'm seeing from both sides, but also where that's leading. And so we really do need to be addressing that. I think both sides have things that they need to address and things that they need to work on. I hope that in some way this video has given people things to think about. I hope that people will set aside being mad at me long enough to actually think about them. I am open to discussion in the comments. Please keep it polite and respectful. And of course, if you want to message me, feel free to do that as well. And that's it for today, guys. I will see you next time.